Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a story that's frankly incredibly difficult, but also necessary. We're looking into a crime that really highlighted a major failure point in our digital age.
Yeah, it's where, personal violence crashes headlong into this world of instant global online sharing.
We're diving into the case of Bianca Devins. A deeply personal tragedy, yes, but one that was almost instantly twisted and amplified online.
And for this deep dive, we've gathered quite a range of source material. We're not just looking at the basic facts of the murder itself.
Yeah, not at all.
Our sources detail the timeline, of course, but also, crucially, the relationship between Bianca and the perpetrator, which was described in very conflicting ways.
Very conflicted.
And then there's the reaction, the way those horrific images spread online, the sheer speed and the trauma that caused. And finally, the push for legal change that came out of it, known as Bianca's Law.
So, our goal here is to try and piece all of this together. We need to understand what happened leading up to Bianca's death, yes, but also, crucially, how the aftermath played out online, how that digital aspect caused so much more harm.
Exactly. We want to dissect how interpersonal violence, this kind of toxic control, intersected with technology, and what the fallout means for, well, for platforms, for accountability, and for victims' families going forward.
It's a tough look at control, misogyny, and where our digital society failed.
Understanding the people.
Let's begin with Bianca Devins. She was tragically young, only 17, when she died in July 2019. And she had plans, she wanted to study psychology at Mohawk Valley Community College.
Yeah, she had a path she wanted to follow. But the sources we looked at really emphasized something else about her background, the significant mental health challenges she was facing.
That seems really central to her story, unfortunately.
It does. The material highlights how complex her emotional world was. Bianca was diagnosed with several conditions: depression, anxiety, PTSD, and also borderline personality disorder, BPD.
And these weren't minor struggles.
No, definitely not. The sources mentioned she'd been in and out of the hospital for treatment during her teenage years. And, BPD often involves things like intense fears of abandonment, really big emotional swings, and difficulty with relationships. It just adds another layer of tragedy to her search for connection.
And that search for connection, it seems, often led her online. The sources suggest she felt isolated sometimes because of these struggles.
Right, so online spaces became a kind of refuge for her, a place to find community, maybe validation that she wasn't getting elsewhere.
It's just heartbreaking when you think about it.
It really is. That the very environment that offered her some comfort ultimately became the stage for the ultimate violence against her in her memory.
And the sources mentioned she wasn't naive about the dangers online either.
No, she wasn't. Compounding her vulnerability, she had apparently dealt with online harassment before, specifically from toxic groups, some associated with the incel movement. This had reportedly been going on for at least a couple of years before she even met Clark.
So she was already navigating a pretty hostile digital world.
Exactly. But we need to be careful here. There's an important clarification the sources make.
Okay.
While online communities, particularly places like 4chan, very quickly labeled the perpetrator, Brandon Clark, as an incel, and some even celebrated the murder as, an incel victory.
Which is just horrifying in itself.
It is. But the police, at the time, urged caution. They stated they weren't aware of any specific ties between Clark and the incel movement in relation to this murder.
So that narrative might have spread faster than the facts.
It seems so. It highlights how quickly misinformation got tangled up in this whole tragedy right from the start.
Okay, let's shift focus then to Brandon Andrew Clark. He was 21 at the time. What do the sources tell us about his background?
Well, his background also contains significant trauma, according to the material. Specifically, a really disturbing event from his childhood, witnessing his father holding his mother at knife point for several hours.
That's incredibly severe trauma for a child to witness.
Absolutely. And, the sources provide this not as an excuse, obviously, but as context. It might point to a learned pattern of domestic violence, maybe normalizing extreme aggression or control for him.
But despite that history, his initial presentation was very different.
Completely different, it seems. Bianca's mother, Kimberly, is quoted in the research saying that when she first met him, she found him very nice and polite.
That contrast is chilling.
It really is. This ability to present a harmless exterior while potentially hiding obsession or rage. It's something you see in many cases of violence rooted in entitlement.
And that brings us straight to maybe the most confusing part, their relationship. They met on Instagram, April 2019?
Yeah, just about 3 months before the murder, a very short time.
And how that relationship was defined seems to be all over the map.
Totally. The sources show a real disconnect. Law enforcement initially called it a personally intimate one.
Okay, so suggesting a romantic or sexual element.
Right, but Bianca's family, her mother specifically, and friends, they painted a very different picture.
And this is where Bianca's own words seem crucial.
Absolutely. Her mother stated very clearly that Bianca had told Clark she didn't want to date him. She set a boundary.
But the mother also felt Clark wasn't accepting that.
Yeah, she felt he wanted more. So you have this tension right there. Bianca setting a limit, Clark seemingly pushing against it or wanting something else. That dynamic seems critical.
And even within the family, there was some confusion.
Apparently so. One of Bianca's sisters described Clark as a trusted family friend, which suggests, he was good at maintaining that nice guy facade, even to those close to Bianca.
But then there's a much darker perspective from another source.
Yes. A friend of Bianca's reportedly had serious concerns. This friend feared Clark might have been sexually exploiting Bianca, maybe even allegedly supplying her with drugs to kind of entice her or control her time.
Wow, okay, so that moves it from miscommunication into potential coercion.
Exactly. It's a huge spectrum, isn't it? From intimate relationship to trusted friend to exploiter.
So what's the core issue here, looking at these conflicting views?
If you look at it through the lens of what eventually happened, the sources really point towards denial and control on Clark's part. The key distinction seems to be between Clark's perception, which sounds obsessive, maybe interpreting any kindness as romantic interest.
Like entitlement.
Exactly, entitlement. Versus Bianca's reality, which seems to have been clearly stated as platonic boundary setting, non-committal.
So stepping back, does this fit a known pattern?
It really does seem to. The sources strongly suggest that Clark's actions, especially the horrific public display later, fit into this wider pattern of violent male entitlement. The idea that when faced with rejection, when he felt maybe emasculated because he couldn't control her choices.
The reaction is extreme violence.
The extreme aggression, yeah. Designed to assert dominance and ultimately to control her narrative, her image, even after her death, because he couldn't control her in life. It seems like in his mind, the relationship was perhaps transactional, and when she didn't deliver what he expected, the outcome was horrific.
Okay, let's move into the events of the murder itself. This happened over the night of July 13th into the morning of July 14th, 2019. The sources seem quite specific about the lead-up.
They are. On July 13th, Clark, Bianca, and another friend, the sources call him Alex, they drove from the Utica area into New York City for a concert, an artist named Nicole Dollanganger.
Right, and it was after the concert on the way back that things escalated.
Yes. The sources pinpoint the likely trigger for the argument that preceded the murder. A kiss between Bianca and this friend Alex after the show.
So, a moment where Clark perhaps felt he lost her attention or felt rejected?
That seems to be the interpretation. That perceived slight, that shattering of his sense of entitlement, appears to be what set things off.
And it escalated incredibly quickly and violently.
Yes. As they were driving back towards Utica, Clark attacked Bianca while she was asleep in the back seat.
The details are brutal.
Extremely. He used a long knife. The sources note he'd apparently hidden it near his seat. He sliced her neck. She died in the early hours of July 14th. The sources describe her body as being left nearly decapitated.
And his actions immediately after, they don't sound like someone in a blind rage. They sound calculated.
Very much so. He left her body in the car, then built a bonfire nearby. And he was listening to music specifically, a song called Test Drive by Joji. It feels very staged, doesn't it? Like this wasn't just the act itself, but a kind of performance he was setting up.
A performance for an audience he intended to reach. Which leads us to the digital aspect.
Exactly. The digital documentation confirms this wasn't impulsive. Authorities found clear signs of premeditation. Not just the knife being hidden, but also the fact that he had equipment ready to videotape the killing.
And his online search history beforehand?
Even more chilling. He'd made very specific searches. How to find the carotid artery, how to incapacitate or kill someone, searches about choking, about hanging. This looks like planning aimed at causing maximum fatal harm.
So after Bianca was dead, he immediately shifted to broadcasting it.
That's right. He started by calling his own family. The call sounded like a suicide note, which is what prompted them to call 911. But critically, before the police arrived,
He started posting online.
he posted extremely graphic photos of Bianca's body to Discord.
And the caption he used? It says so much about his mindset.
It really does. It read, "Sorry, Furs, you're going to have to find somebody else to orbit." And the sources clarify that term, orbiting.
Right, meaning following someone online, asking for pictures, sometimes even stalking.
So his final message about her wasn't about her as a person, but as an object of online attention that he had now permanently removed. It's
Mhm.
pure objectification and control.
And there's video, too.
A video of the murder itself was also created, yes, making the horror he wanted to share even more intense. By around 7 a.m., police were getting alerts, not just from his family, but from Discord users who had seen the images and immediately reported them.
So other users tried to intervene quickly.
They did, which led police to the scene. But even when law enforcement arrived, Clark didn't stop.
He continued the performance.
It seems that way. He stabbed himself in the neck. He lay down on a green tarp that was covering Bianca's body, and he kept posting more photos online, even with police there.
Incredible.
And they found a suicide note and another message on his phone that just read, "May you never forget me."
That phrase sums it up, doesn't it? Infamy over everything else.
It seems to capture that desire for spectacle. And perhaps the most calculated part was his own call to 911. He called the dispatcher himself.
What did he say?
He calmly stated, "My name is Brandon. The victim is Bianca Michelle Devins. I'm not going to stay on the phone for long because I still need to do the suicide part of the murder-suicide."
Wow. Not remorse, just logistics of his
Yeah,
plan.
exactly. It felt like a deliberate final statement for the record.
So when you look at all the possible motivations discussed in the sources, the police suggesting he wanted fame, Clark himself giving different stories, where does the weight of evidence land?
Well, the prosecution noted he gave various explanations, but the consensus among experts, including Bianca's mother and criminal justice scholars like Alison Morganski, really centered on control. Absolute control. Yes. Morganski specifically pointed out that posting the images online was the ultimate demonstration of control and power. It fit the profile of male offenders reacting to feeling rejected or emasculated. Sharing it digitally ensured that even after her death, he controlled her image, her story, how she would be remembered, or rather, how he would be remembered in relation to her.
Okay, this next part is where the case really becomes a landmark example of, well, of platform failure and the horrors of online virality. As soon as those images hit Discord, they exploded.
Exploded is the right word. The photos of Bianca's body spread incredibly rapidly across basically all major social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It wasn't just a leak. It became one of the most public, visible instances of a murder being documented and shared on social media almost in real time.
The speed must have been terrifying.
And what made it uniquely awful was the reaction from certain corners of the internet. On 4chan, hundreds of posts apparently went up praising Clark, celebrating it as another 4chan murder. Similar celebratory posts appeared on sites like incels.co and 8chan.
So active celebration of the violence.
Yes, reinforcing the same toxic, misogynistic ideas that likely fueled the crime itself. Regardless of whether Clark officially identified with those groups, it was horrific.
And it wasn't just celebration, right? People trying to profit from it.
Disgustingly, yes. The sources describe accounts popping up that literally promised to share the graphic photos of Bianca in exchange for likes and follows, basically using her violation as engagement bait.
That's incredibly predatory.
And alongside that, fake fundraising websites appeared almost instantly, trying to cash in on the tragedy, on the public attention.
And all this was happening amidst a storm of bad information.
Completely. The initial online discussion was chaotic, rumors flying everywhere. Even verified prominent Twitter users were confidently identifying Clark as an incel, sharing that narrative tens of thousands of times, while the police were still urging caution on that front. It just added layers of confusion and, frankly, potentially harmful narratives.
But amidst all that darkness, there was an attempt to fight back digitally.
There was, and it's important to highlight. People saw the harm being done and organized a kind of grassroots counteraction online.
What did they do?
They started a movement using specific phrases, most notably, pink clouds for Bianca. The idea was to flood social media feeds' timelines, search results with images of pink clouds, original artwork, positive things.
To drown out the graphic images.
Exactly, to try and bury the violating content under a wave of something beautiful and protective. To reclaim the digital space associated with her name. The term Bianca also trended for a while, showing the urgency people felt.
That effort really speaks to the level of psychological damage those images were causing.
Immense damage. James Densley, a criminal justice professor cited in the sources, warned that just seeing those images could be traumatizing for anyone. But for Bianca's family, the impact was described as unbearable and ongoing.
Can you elaborate on what the sources say about the family's experience?
It's truly harrowing. They suffered what's essentially secondary victimization, but amplified by the internet. Her stepfather reportedly faced constant online harassment and suffered severe flashbacks. Her sister described seeing the images in her mind all the time, especially when trying to sleep.
Just relentless torment.
And her mother summed it up powerfully, saying something like, "So many people have been affected by the pictures, scarred for life and suffering from PTSD, unable to erase the image." It wasn't just grief, it was this ongoing digital assault.
It's a uniquely modern kind of horror, isn't it? Your deepest pain turned into a spectacle, weaponized by strangers online over and over again.
And that brings us squarely to the social media companies themselves, their response, or lack thereof, initially.
What did they do at first?
Well, Instagram and Facebook did remove Clark's accounts. They said they were trying to stop the photos from spreading. Facebook took a technical step, adding the images to a digital fingerprint database to try and block re-uploads, and they blacklisted a specific search term, "Yes, Juliet."
Okay, so some actions were taken.
In Discord, where it started, shut down the server Clark had used pretty quickly.
But the sources seem to indicate these steps weren't nearly enough or fast enough.
That's the overwhelming conclusion from the material, especially regarding that digital fingerprinting or hashing technology.
Explain how that's supposed to work again.
So basically, the platform software creates a unique code, a hash for an image or video. Once an image is identified as banned content, its hash goes into a database. Then, theoretically, anytime someone tries to upload something, the system checks its hash against the blacklist. If it matches, the upload is blocked automatically.
But that system failed here.
Spectacularly, it seems. Despite having this tech, users who tried to report the graphic photos of Bianca on Instagram were often getting automated replies saying the content didn't violate guidelines.
How could that happen?
It suggests either the system wasn't updated fast enough, or maybe tiny edits to the image's cropping. Filters were creating new hashes that weren't yet blacklisted, allowing them to slip through. Whatever the reason, the result was inaction.
And the images stayed up for days.
Some reports say the images remained visible on Instagram for up to 4 days. 4 days of that content circulating widely.
And the problem didn't just vanish after those 4 days.
No. Bianca's mother claimed that even months later, the images could still be found on Facebook. And her sister reported still receiving the photos, people sending them to her nearly 2 years after the murder.
2 years later, that's just unimaginable. The trauma just keeps getting inflicted.
Exactly. The digital crime persisted long after the physical one ended.
What did experts say about the platform's response?
The criticism was harsh. Hani Farid, a digital forensics expert, was quoted as being pretty blunt about it. He argued that the companies absolutely had the tools to deal with this, spread much more effectively and quickly.
So it wasn't a lack of capability.
According to Farid, no. He felt their failure to act bordered on criminal negligence, even if it wasn't technically illegal under the laws at that time. It really exposed a huge gap between what platforms could do, what they ethically should do, and what...
Let's turn to the legal proceedings against Brandon Clark. It wasn't straightforward initially.
No, it wasn't. He was charged with second-degree murder and initially pleaded not guilty back in July 2019. And during that time, while he was awaiting trial, there was another incident. He apparently faced charges for having prison contraband.
What was that?
Correctional officers found a shiv, basically a sharpened toothbrush, in his cell. So further issues even while incarcerated.
But then the trajectory of the case shifted.
Yes, significantly.
Yeah.
In February 2020, he changed his plea to guilty.
Okay, so admitting responsibility.
Well, seemingly. But then a few months later, in June 2020, he tried to withdraw that guilty plea.
On what grounds?
He claimed his lawyer hadn't represented him properly, that he'd been failed by his counsel.
Did that work?
No. The court denied it. Because he had already admitted guilt quite clearly on the record, they didn't allow him to take it back.
And during this time, did we get any clearer insight into his motive directly from him?
We did, apparently. According to Bianca's mother, Clark wrote a letter while he was in custody that was quite revealing.
What did it say?
She described him as bragging about the killing in the letter and explicitly stating his motive. It came down to rejection. He apparently wrote that he couldn't handle the thought of her walking out of his life.
So that confirms it wasn't about fame or anything else. It was about possessiveness.
Exactly. It stripped away any other potential explanations and rooted it firmly in toxic control and his inability to accept her decision.
And the sentencing finally came when?
March 2021, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. That brought the criminal case itself to a close.
But for the Devins family, the fight wasn't over. It shifted focus.
Absolutely. They immediately pivoted towards advocacy, recognizing that the existing laws simply weren't adequate to handle the digital dimension of the crime. Bianca's mother, Kimberly, worked with their then Congressman, Anthony Brindisi.
What were they pushing for?
They were demanding much stronger action from the social media companies to prevent the spread of graphic, violent content like what happened with Bianca's images. Brindisi even formally asked the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to conduct an audit into how the platforms handled this specific case.
And this led to the proposal of Bianca's law.
Yes. The initial federal proposal was introduced in September 2020. It was pretty ambitious.
What would it have done?
It targeted larger social media platforms, those with over $10 million in revenue and 100,000 monthly users. And it would have required them to do something quite specific.
Which was?
To set up a dedicated office, like a specific department, whose sole job was to find and remove violent content that violated the platform's own rules, quickly and effectively.
Trying to close those loopholes and bypass the failures of automated systems?
Exactly, to put a human, C-centered, mandatory process in place.
Did the federal version pass?
The federal bill faced challenges, but they achieved a major victory at the state level in New York.
Okay, what happened there?
In January 2022, the New York State Assembly passed its own version of Bianca's law.
And what did the New York law do?
This version specifically targeted the act of sharing the images. It made it a crime in New York to post, share, or publish personal images relating to a crime victim if the intent is to degrade or abuse them.
So it legally recognized the harm caused by sharing that content.
Precisely. It acknowledged that spreading those violating images is an extension of the original crime and should carry legal consequences. It was a really significant step.
And that law is now in effect.
Yes. Governor Kathy Hochul signed it into law at the end of December 2022, a major milestone achieved through the family's relentless advocacy.
Alongside that legal battle, the family also worked to honor Bianca's memory in other ways.
They did. They wanted to ensure her aspirations weren't forgotten. They started a scholarship fund in her name.
For psychology students?
Yes, specifically for students pursuing psychology.
Yeah.
Reflecting the path Bianca herself had wanted to take. They funded it partly through community events, like something called the Bee Gala, which also showcased Bianca's own artwork, trying to focus on her life and creativity.
That's a beautiful way to remember her. But unfortunately, the sources indicate there was yet another painful chapter involving the legal system itself.
Yeah, this part is quite shocking, frankly. In July 2021, the Devins family actually filed a lawsuit against the Oneida County District Attorney's Office.
Suing the DA? What for?
The lawsuit alleged the distribution of child pornography. The family claimed the GA's office had released incredibly sensitive materials related to Bianca's case in response to a FOIA request. That's the Freedom of Information Law.
Wait, what kind of materials are we talking about?
According to the lawsuit allegations, this included footage of Bianca's death, other explicit footage, and even nude photos recovered from her phone.
Released through an official FOIL request. To whom?
Allegedly to multiple parties, including documentary filmmakers and a YouTube blogger.
Oh my God. So the very material that caused the family such profound trauma
Was potentially re-released into the public sphere by the DA's office itself through a standard legal process. That was the allegation. Now, it's important to note that lawsuit was ultimately dismissed in 2022.
But the fact that it was even possible or alleged.
It highlights a potentially devastating systemic issue, doesn't it? About how victims' sensitive materials are handled and whether they're adequately protected from further exploitation, even by official channels. It suggests the trauma could be compounded by the very system meant to provide justice.
So when you look at this entire case, from the relationship dynamics to the murder to the digital explosion and the legal battles, it really serves as a stark modern example of how violence gets amplified today.
Absolutely. You see these direct parallels drawn in the source material between Bianca's case and other horrific events that went viral, like the Christchurch mosque shootings.
Where the act of documenting and broadcasting the violence becomes part of the crime itself.
Exactly. It wasn't just an afterthought or evidence. It was integral to the perpetrator's goal, projecting power, creating terror, achieving notoriety. The virality was part of the weapon.
And at its core, what happened to Bianca was, as the experts pointed out, a case of domestic violence, of toxic masculinity reacting to rejection.
Fundamentally, yes. But it was domestic violence supercharged by technology. Clark used the tools of the modern internet age to maximize his control, not just over Bianca in her final moments, but over her image, her memory, indefinitely. And in doing so, inflicted prolonged, agonizing trauma on her family.
The crime didn't end when she died. It kept echoing with every share, every view, every failure by the platforms to contain it.
Precisely.
We've seen how legislation, like Bianca's Law in New York, is trying to respond to this specific kind of digital harm, criminalizing the malicious sharing of such content. But it leaves us with a really critical question, something for you, the listener, to think about after this deep dive. Given how permanent digital information can be, what level of ongoing responsibility should these massive platforms bear when evidence of a crime, especially traumatic, degrading images like these, remains findable online, potentially forever? Is removing it once enough?
And tied to that, how does that concept of control, the very thing that motivated the killer, get twisted and amplified by the platforms themselves? By algorithms that are literally designed to promote engagement and virality, even if the content is horrific.
Where does platform accountability truly begin and end in the face of such lasting digital trauma?
It's a huge ethical challenge. This case is a brutal reminder that while laws might slowly evolve, the technology and perhaps the fundamental business models of these platforms often lag way behind what's needed to protect victims and their families.
It's definitely something that requires ongoing scrutiny and reflection as this kind of digital violence sadly likely becomes more sophisticated.
No easy answers.
No easy answers at all. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.